Hey everyone, it's Asia from CrochetEverAfter.com. Today we're going to be making this broomstick crochet lace shawl. If you've never done broomstick crochet before, I'm going to walk you through how to do it and what you need to do it, because you do need either a broomstick or a knitting needle, but I'll explain all that in just a second. This is made with worsted weight yarn, so this is a great project to learn broomstick and have a great finished item that you can actually use. So this is a perfect shawl for summertime, afternoons or cool falls. Also, I'm going to be giving away this owl shawl pin that you see right here, so check out my blog if you like it, and you can go ahead and enter. It'll be up for a few weeks. If you miss it, make sure that you follow my blog, because I do giveaways all of the time. But we're going to go get some worsted weight yarn, and our hook and our knitting needle is which I'm using, and you'll see why, and we'll get started. Okay, so to start our shawl, we're going to begin with some foundation single crochets. So I'm going to put a slip knot on my hook, and I'm going to leave a long enough tail for weaving in, and then we're going to do 240 foundation single crochets. So if you're not familiar with foundation single crochets, I'm going to show you a little bit slower on how to do these, but I do have a tutorial. If you really don't like doing them, you can do foundation chains. You're going to do 241 foundation chains, turn your work, and then single crochet back 240 single crochets. So you skip that very first chain and single crochet back across. The reason I like foundation single crochet for the shawl, because we're working it widthwise to get the nice broomstick going widthwise on our shawl, we have to do so many chains. So the foundation single crochet not only makes a nice stretchy foundation, it also makes it easier to count, kind of. You don't have to sit there and make sure that you have exactly 241 foundation chains. You can count as you go. So let me show you what that means, and it'll make a little bit more sense. So with the foundation single crochet, we only have to chain 2 times. So we yarn over always from back to front, pull your hook through, and do one more, and that's it for chaining. Now we're going to start a foundation single crochet. So if you've never done these before, what we're doing is we're combining our foundation chain and our first row of single crochet all together, and you're working one of those each at a time. So to do that, you're going to skip your first chain, the one next to your hook, and you're going to work into the very first chain that you made, the second chain from your hook. So you're going to put your hook through. You can go back loop or back and bottom bump, whichever. It's not super important. Oops, I lost both of them. So I'll just get the back loop, because that's always easiest for me. And then we're going to lay over and pull up a loop. So this is the first step of making a foundation single crochet. Now, the easiest way to explain this is we're making one foundation chain and one single crochet at a time. So that will help you to remember the steps of this. So we yarn over, and the first thing we need to do is make a foundation chain. So we're going to pull through just that first loop, and that is our foundation chain. So if we turn it sideways, as we go, it's going to look more like a foundation chain, but there are 2 loops that we created with that yarn over and pull through. And now we need to create our single crochet. So we already have 2 loops on our hook, so we just yarn over from back to front and pull through both loops. So now I've created my very first chain and my very first single crochet. So it's important to remember where that chain is, because that's what we need to insert our hook into for our next set. So there's 2 loops right down here, and we're going to go under both of them. So you can see how I have 2 loops there. Then I'm going to pull up and yarn over and pull up a loop. Now I need to create another foundation chain, so I yarn over back to front, pull through just that first loop, and now I need to create my single crochet. I yarn over and I pull through 2. So now I've got 2 sets of each. Again, if you need to, turn it sideways to help you find those 2 loops. Here are my loops. It's a little bit different than working like a regular stitch because there is like a loop that's kind of close to it. You just want to get under both of the loops of the foundation chain that you made. So we pull up our loop, yarn over, pull through the first loop, yarn over, pull through the last 2. So as you're making these, it'll get a little bit easier. You'll be able to see the foundation chain appearing as you're working it, and it will be easier to count because those first couple look like nothing, but as you keep going you'll see that you're starting to get a whole chain, a whole row 1 of a chain and a single crochet. So as I work it, you can see that I'm starting to get the V's on the bottom of my foundation chain. So it's almost like working into the bottom bump of a foundation chain as you work this. So as long as you remember to make your foundation chain, get under both your loops so that you have a nice foundation chain on the bottom. Just remember to only pull through the first loop and then pull through 2 loops. Just think of it as creating a foundation chain. Say I gotta create my foundation chain, done. Create my single crochet, done. And you're going to do 240 of these. So this is where the benefit of not having to do a foundation chain comes in, because you can just start making a ton of these and then you can go back and count them and, you know, put a stitch marker in if you need to. Like once you get to 100, put a stitch marker in at the 100 mark, keep going, you know, or put a stitch marker in or a piece of yarn every 20 or 50 of them so that you can keep track, so you don't have to start counting them over. You can just kind of keep track as you're making them. But we're going to do 240 of these. If you still need help with this foundation single crochet, you can check out my dedicated tutorial for it. If you still need a little bit more help, or just kind of rewind this and watch the steps over. But you can see how as you go, you get faster and faster with it, so it does get easier. The first couple stitches are very confusing looking because it looks like a big blob of nothing, but as you get going you'll see that it starts looking like a whole row of single crochet. See, I accidentally pulled through both loops. I also have, if you make a mistake, I have a tutorial on how to get back, but basically if you accidentally pull through a wrong loop, just remember that you should only have 1 loop available. So if you've got a couple loops, pull them out till you're just back to 1 loop, and that's the end or the beginning of a stitch, so that you can start over, because all the other parts of it will have more than 1 loop. So that's an easy way to get back to a stitch. Just get to 1 loop and start over. So keep going. This is a really easy pattern. Lots and lots of the same thing over and over again. So get to 240 of these and then we'll start our broomstick. I've got my 240 foundation single crochets, and now I'm ready to start making my broomstick stitches. So what you do after you finish your 240, you do not turn your work. You're going to start putting loops onto your stick. So I'm using a knitting needle. You can use a broomstick. It'll have more of a rounded edge on the end. I like the knitting needle because it's pointy, and you'll see why. There is less surface area for it, so when I'm putting my loops on, I'm going to be squishing them all the way down as much as I can, but I have a stopper so they won't fall off. So I'm using a 19mm knitting needle. You can, whatever size you want for your loops, but this is the size that is in the gauge, so if you want to pick up the same exact knitting needle, I have the links for that by the pattern, so check that out if you need that. And we're going to get started putting our loops on our stick. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is put our very first loop on our hook. When you're working your foundation single crochets, you're thinking, if you're trying to figure out like which is the top, which is the bottom, just think as if you had worked a whole row of single crochet going the correct way, your loops would be on top and your finishing loop, or your stitches would be on top and your finishing loop would be on top. So that's how you can tell what is what. You'll see that it kind of tapers off. That's just a normal from the foundation single crochet, and as you work it won't be as noticeable. So the first thing we do is we pull out our loop, and this is going to be our very first loop that goes onto our knitting needle. Now as you add your loops to your stick, so I'm just going to call all of these sticks now so that if you're using a broomstick or a knitting needle, that's what I'm referring to. You're going to pull your tail the same size as the shaft or the even part of your stick. You want all your loops the same size, so you want to keep good tension and make all your loops the same size as your shaft. Now this loop goes with that very first, technically last stitch you made. So to get our next loop, what we're going to do is we're going to go in underneath our next stitch. So if you turn your work sideways, you'll see your V's. So this V goes with this first loop, and I'm going to grab this next stitch, the next V, and I'm going to grab my yarn. Now I am just grabbing it from underneath and pulling it up. You can do like a normal yarn over, but when you pull it through, it's going to have a little bit of a twist. So you can see that twist there. So when I let go, I have to untwist it before I put it on my needle or my stick. So just if you hold your tail with your fingers over here, so you can see I have my needle in my hand, or my stick. I keep calling it a needle instead of a stick like I said I would. Have my stick in my hand, have my tail with my fingers. I reach through that stitch and I grab the tail and pull it through. Then I take my hook off, grab the tail and pull it through. Again, so I go into my next stitch, the next two loops, grab my tail, pull that up, drop off my hook and pull that over the knitting needle. You can just kind of do them nice and slack for a few stitches, so you can see I'm not tightening down just yet. You can just pull it enough to not be too loose. And then once you get 3 or 4, don't go too many far in because it's going to be difficult. You can pull it tight to get all those and kind of twist them to get the tails to the right size. So as you work across, get those nice and tight so that your loops will be all the same size when you come back across to work them off. So we never turn our work again. This is going to be what we're doing all the way across. You're going to put your hook through your next stitch, grab your tail, pull it up, drop it off your hook, put it on your stick. So you will feel very strange when you first start doing this. It will feel very slow and awkward. But by the end of this first row, you'll probably be a pro at it, having to do it 240 times. The great thing about this stitch is it makes quite a tall stitch. So instead of working single crochets back and forth for the same amount of height, you're getting probably a good 4 or 5 rows of single crochet height. Oops, didn't grab the right part of the stitch. 4 or 5 rows of single crochet out of this one row of broomstick. So keep going across, pick up all 240 loops as you work. When they start getting full, start squishing them together. So you can squish them all together, and what you'll get is kind of a little ruffle. Not a big deal. It will be perfectly fine. So just keep working all the way across, and then we'll come back after we get all 240 on, and I'll show you how to work them off. Okay, I've got all 240 loops on my knitting needle, and you can see I have them all squished on. Don't worry if it does this little spiral thing because your loops are still the size of your shaft. They're just making room. You can push them all even. It's just you'll get kind of a ruffly edge. but it kind of naturally wants to twist around your stick. So once you get all 240 on your stick, now it's time to take them all back off. So we're going to start doing our broomstick stitch. So for the broomstick stitch that I'm using, we're going to be working off in groups of 4. So that means I'm going to take 4 loops at a time and remove them and work my stitches. Now some people like to push off all of their loops at one time off of their stick. You can do that if that's your preference. I feel it takes a little bit of extra time because you have to make sure your loops are all facing the same way when you're putting your hook back through. If you check out my actual broomstick lace tutorial, I do show you how it looks if you push all your loops off at once, so you can check that out. I'm not going to do it on here because I do like to work it off of the needle. So what we're going to do is start pushing your loops down so that you can get under the first 4. But make sure that you keep the loop, this very last loop, the same size, because the yarn is coming out right here. If I start pulling on it as I'm pulling it down, you'll see it's starting to shrink to the size of my knitting needle. So make sure that you're keeping your loops the same size as your shaft as you're pushing them off. It's mostly just for that very first one where you might have that problem. The rest of them should stay pretty much the same size. So this is why I like the knitting needle, because I have that tapered edge where I can stick my hook in before they come completely off the loop or off the stick. So I pull 4 loops off. You can see I have 4 loops on my hook, and then I'm just going to pull them up before I do anything. So I pull them horizontally up against where my stitches are. So that way I can make sure they're all the same height. I'm just going to push them to my stopper on my hook. I love my hooks that have the stoppers because I can do that. Then I'm going to take my tail and I'm going to yarn over and pull through those 4 loops. Now this, what I'm going to do next is only for the first stitch of each row, and that's going to be a slip stitch. So I'm going to yarn over and I'm going to pull through the loop that's on there and tighten that down. That's just to get the row started. It's not counted as a stitch, it's just there to anchor it in and to get the height correct. So now we're going to do 4 single crochets inside those 4 loops. So we have 4 loops, so we need to do 4 stitches because we need to keep our stitch count consistent. We want 4 stitches to result from these 4 loops. So you can spread out your loops from where that slip stitch is, and you're going to be reaching your hook right through the center of those. So you have 4 loops on both sides of your hook. Yarn over, pull up your loop, yarn over, and pull through both. So you got 1 single crochet, then you're going to do another one, and then 3, and 4. And now you've completed your very first broomstick crochet stitch. So as we work across, we're going to make lots of these 4 loop, 4 single crochet stitches. So now I go back to my stick and I grab my next 4 loops. It's a little bit easier when it's not on camera because the camera's in my way. I can have the stick kind of in my lap or wedged under something, so it's not as difficult to work my stitches. So it'll probably go a lot easier without the camera in the middle of it. So now we don't do the slip stitch. I yarn over, I pull up my loop, I've got 2 loops on my hook, and I just start single crocheting. So I do my first single crochet, and then I do 3 more. So once you get the hang of grabbing them off of your stick, it'll go a lot faster. This row is a lot faster than the putting loops on row. So grab my next 4, pull those up. So I always do the little tug before I begin to make sure that they're all staying the same size. Oops, and I did a slip stitch accidentally. Put my hook back through. Start with your single crochet and work through. So this whole row is just doing this over and over again, pulling 4 stitches off and doing 4 single crochets. So we should have 60 of these at the end because we have 240 stitches divided by 4, you get 60. So we're going to work all the way across. I'm going to meet up with you right at the end of the row so you can see how to work your last stitch, and then we'll keep going with our pattern. Okay, I'm down to my last group of 4 for this first row, so I'm going to slide those off. And I was saying I wanted to show you the last stitch, and it's basically the same as the rest. I just wanted you to make sure that you understood that you're still just doing the 4 single crochets in there. There's no slip stitching or anything special. So once you finish with those 4 single crochets, your entire row is done. And it's pretty rectangular. You have little dips from the loops, but that's normal. And it's very long, so if I just keep on going and going, but I'm not going to go all the way. I'm going to start on my next row. So the same thing goes. We don't turn our work, we pull up our loop, and we start feeding our loops back onto our stick. So I have my first loop. Remember, it goes with your first stitch. So for our next loop, we go into the next stitch. And it's basically the same stuff over and over. We're going to pull up our loops, tighten the loops as we go, and put all 240 back on. And then we're going to work them off the same way. Alright, I have gotten through all of my rows of broomstick crochet. And technically there are 16 broomstick stitch rows, but altogether this is row 33 because we count each row of broomstick crochet as 2 rows, the adding of the loops and then the working of the loops off. So now we just have 1 row of work left, and that's just going to be an edging of single crochet. So this time we're actually going to turn our work. So you don't turn your work after row 1 until you get to row 34. So I'm going to turn my work, I'm just going to do a chain 1, and then I'm going to start single crocheting into every one of my stitches across. And that's going to be the final row. After this I'm going to wet block this. You technically don't have to block it. It looks okay on its own when it's in worsted weight. If it was a lace weight yarn, you would probably want to block it. But you can see that it drapes very well without any kind of blocking. But I'm doing a review for the yarn that I'm using for this project because, as you can see, it's turning my fingernails blue. So the dye, it's an independent dyer, the dye is kind of wearing off a little bit as I work. I've never had that happen before. So I'm going to wet block this to see how much dye is going to come off of it so I can show for the review. So you can check out the review for this yarn as well if you want to see how much of the dye is going to come off. But you'll see it in the final after we block it. So you'll also see how to block it. So just keep on single crocheting across, and then you're going to fasten off and weave in your ends. Alright, I've got my project to go, and I'm going to throw it in this white bowl to see how much of the dye is going to come off. So this might be a total science project right now if the dye starts coming off right away. I have a white towel underneath me just to make sure that if this is going to undye itself or if it's going to lose a lot of color, that I don't dye my backdrop. So I'm just submerging it all in so that the yarn can soak up the water. Once it's fully submerged, it should stay underwater. I can see a little bit of the blue already. If you can see the side of the bowl right here, you can see that some of the dye is already coming off. That's why I wanted to use this white bowl. It's a little small for my project, but I wanted to be able to see the actual water in my stainless steel bowl. It doesn't really, you can't see the colors very well of the water. So we're going to let this sit for 15 minutes in the water, and then we're going to take it out and see what our water looks like. but I can see already that there's a little bit of color coming off. So we'll see how it looks after 15 minutes. Hopefully it doesn't come too much out. Okay, it's been about 15 minutes, and I'm going to pull the shawl out and see how the water looks. See how much of the color we lost. And it actually doesn't look too bad. Squeeze out all the excess. Sorry, I was more concerned showing you the water than the actual blocking of the shawl. So you can see there's just a little bit of blue. It didn't really bleed all that bad. The shawl still looks great. So I'm going to go ahead and block this out, and we'll take a look at the finished shawl in just a second. Okay, I finished the shawl. I blocked it all up, and now you can see it draped on this little mannequin. And it was very easy to block. You just run a straight edge and pin it, and you're all set to go. The colors did not fade, so the yarn still looks great. If you have any questions about this or any other requests, make sure you leave them below. But thank you all for watching.